Welcome into the Yachts and Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik, Skopil on today's show. And we'll be frank, we're recording on July 19th. It's a Friday. We were expecting to have a podcast go live earlier this week for a verbal commitment from a 5-star. And we were expecting to have another one today go live on a verbal commitment from a 5-star. Neither of those commitments have happened. DJ Pickett was locked in for Oregon, it sounds like. We were prepared for him to commit to Oregon on Tuesday, and he ended
Wednesday.
or Wednesday, excuse me. He ended up at the very last minute changing his decision, committing with LSU, spurning the Oregon Ducks, also saying no to the hometown Miami Hurricanes. We'll talk about that. And then today we were preparing literally just now for Trey McNutt's verbal commitment, the number one safety in the country. And Hayes Fawcett and McNutt have both shared on their social media channels today that McNutt will no longer be committing at all today. So it's not like Oregon lost his commitment. We don't know if that was going to be the case. We expected it to be, but he's not announcing now today. And it will be in early August, I believe August 3rd. Erik, first and foremost, it's bummed because we had a lot of good stuff prepared for both of these happening this week. But from an on-field or from a on the recruiting trail perspective, this feels like a loss. When you had two guys, you felt like we're in your group.
Yeah, it does, and I still feel like it sounds like there's things positive direction with McNutt. You never like to hear a kid delay when you're expecting to get that prospect, though. Like, that always just makes you a little bit hesitant of why is this decision not happening now? I know there's the scuttle seems to be that he wanted certain people to be in attendance with him for today's announcement, but regardless, doesn't feel great. And I think if it was just one of these happening over the course of a 3-day period, it would feel kind of one way. And the fact that it's just kind of two things stacked on top of each other, it feels another. Obviously, this has not raised the alarm bells for Oregon's class because it's still fourth in the country. It's an awesome class, already has 5-star prospects committed in it, a bunch of top 247 players. This doesn't take away from that at all. But, when the expectation is to try to compete for a top 3, top 2, maybe get up to that number 1 spot, I think that's still kind of would take everything kind of fall into place. But when that's the goal, or some people's expectation, when there are 2 5-star kids, as Matt said, that it seems like are trending for Oregon, and then one goes a different direction and one doesn't make a commitment altogether, it does sort of put you in kind of a strange spot. I think Oregon's still obviously recruiting really, really well. They have their Saturday Night Live camp next Saturday. That's a huge day for getting 25 kids on campus, getting 26, 27 and beyond on campus. But, it's just kind of a weird end of this week where we had been talking, I guess behind closed doors in our Slack channels about, and on the message board even, about hey, this is going to be an awesome 2 days here for the Ducks. And it doesn't take much from the class, but it certainly wasn't the way that I thought this week was going to end.
McNutt, or let's start with Pickett first. He says no to Oregon. The pivot here now is this was a 6'4" cornerback. We talked about, I guess, off the show.
We should say, Matt, on a podcast that never was published.
Yes. About how he plays a lot of safety, doesn't play a ton of corner, but maybe his best highlight tape is that he's an elite receiver. Mm-hmm. Oregon liked him at corner. You have to try him at corner. Now it becomes, okay, what's next? If Pickett's not going to be coming to Oregon, what is next on the docket for the Oregon Ducks at the defensive back position? Because they still have verbal commitments from Brandon Finney and Dorian Brew, 2 elite corner prospects. Brew used to be a composite 5-star. Finney was a guy that exploded in the most recent recruiting ranking update, now a top 100 guy. So you got two players that you like at the cornerback position. But I think the reality is, Erik, you probably would like to have a third. And what we'll see happen here potentially is this coming weekend, July 27th, when Oregon has its Saturday Night Live football camp, the Oregon Ducks are expected to host Naeem Offord, a 5-star corner, the number 6 player in the country, the number 2 player at the position, currently committed to Ohio State. Our Auburn site within 24/7 Sports is reporting that, Offord is flying west to Eugene for this weekend. And that's probably going to be the biggest storyline going into Saturday Night Live is, does Offord show up? He's one of 2 5-stars in the 2026 recruiting or 2025 recruiting class that are supposed to be on campus. Michael Terry, the third, an athlete, is the other. But I think, and this is no slouch to Terry because he's the number 1 athlete in the nation, but I think the Offord visit is the number 1 headline. And in hindsight, I posted this on the site. And in hindsight, when a surprise cornerback prospect gets out that he's visiting Oregon along the lines of a commitment from another player that's going to be happening in the next couple of days, normally we've seen this enough. You put 2 and 2 together. That's interesting. Why would a corner all of a sudden be coming out to Oregon if Oregon's supposed to be getting this other corner? Maybe we should have read more into that, but this is the major storyline, is Naeem Offord coming out for Saturday Night Live. And if Oregon could flip him, he's been here multiple times, that Pickett loss will basically be nullified. It will, as if it doesn't impact you at all.
Right. And I think, if you're getting a 5-star, that is really significant. And obviously, we've talked about not all 5-stars are created equal. I think Offord, just looking at what he has done in the high school level and the kind of athlete he is, I think this is a guy who'd be ready to come in sort of in the Decorion Moore role and just be ready to play immediately. I mean, this is an incredibly explosive athlete. Of course they are if you're playing the corner position. But one that and I know we talked on a podcast that didn't go up earlier in the week, but Oregon's corner situation is really interesting, where you've got a lot of guys who are going to play a ton of snaps this year that are seniors or players that could be done with eligibility after this year. And then you've got a bunch of young guys that are kind of unproven or have yet to play enough snaps to really know what you've got. And so you can pitch an Offord or a Pickett or whoever these corners, or a Brew or a Finney on, hey, come out here, and there might be, if not a starting spot, a place in the 2 deep pretty early on. And I think Offord's a guy who you can certainly make that pitch, right? We're pretty reluctant to suggest a true freshman's going to start day 1. I think Decorion Moore has a great chance to do that. And if Oregon were to land Offord, and again, that's a big if. I mean, you're still battling Ohio State. It sounds like Auburn is the other team in the picture. But if that does come to pass, I think there's a real chance this is a guy who plays a pretty sizable role right away. So this is a big time, I think, development here. I think losing Pickett stinks. I loved that kid's tape. It was one of my favorite. It was very, very unique, just the kind of movement skills he has for a 6'4" guy. I think he'd run sub 10, 6 and 100. Really a lot of wiggle. So I think he's going to be a great player at LSU. I of course, selfishly was hoping he would end up at Oregon. But again, if you can go from losing Pickett to losing or to gaining Offord, that's a win every single day of the week, just in terms of keeping the momentum.
Now, McNutt, it's really hard to hype it up other than saying the number 1 safety in the country. This is who Oregon is going after. And we talked about it. If they were going to land Pickett, we'll say the same thing if they are able to land Offord, sometime before McNutt makes his verbal commitment on the 3rd. Safety becomes the priority now for Oregon, even probably still before Offord, or another name to be known later at the cornerback position. You need to add some safeties, probably 2. That was the appeal of Pickett, was that you have to try him at corner because it's just so fascinating to try. But if it doesn't work out, the safety net, he can go right to safety and be really good. McNutt is the number 1 player in the country at that position. He's a dynamic athlete. He does track. He's willing to come up and play at all 3 phases, all 3 levels of the football field. To me, it feels like this is you lose Tysheem Johnson from Oregon's secondary, and this feels like the player that would replace him. Not immediately on the football field, but there's that type of a guy who can cover, who can play nickel, who can play up in the up at the line of scrimmage. That feels like Trey McNutt.
Yeah, and I still think Oregon's leading in the clubhouse here based on everything we've heard, and we'll see if there's like reporting that comes out in the next couple of weeks here before he announces that suggests like, oh, actually he was postponing because Ohio State or USC or.
So we already have some of that.
Yes.
24/7 Sports Tom Loy, our national recruiting editor or reporter, dropped a note on our site. And I won't give the gist of it away, but shocker if it's happening to you. You probably aren't shocked at all. But there's a massive IT issue going on across the world with PC computers, believe it or not.
Okay.
You haven't heard of this, Erik?
I got a MacBook.
Okay. CrowdStrike or Crowdsource or something. There's a big security company that handles IT work for computers, and people are getting blue screens of death across the entire globe right now. That played a factor in this commitment not happening. So, look, recruiting, we see it all. And according to Tom Loy, IT problems is a driving factor in a verbal commitment not happening on July 19th.
But it's not another school.
It's not another school. It's okay. IT problems.
Okay. I mean, that's news because he must have posted that while we were starting the pod here because we hadn't had a full explanation. But my point was, I still think they get it done with McNutt. It sounds like, and maybe this is actually kind of confirmation of some of that, unless things change in the interim. What a weird world we live in where, like computer problems are, I guess it makes sense. Computers were pretty important. I'm using one right now. But my point was like, I think of Pickett and of McNutt, if you were to lose on both hypothetically, and again, I don't know if that's going to be the case, losing McNutt would almost hurt more just because I don't see a clear follow-up to it. Now, I do know Dorian Brew, I think, has capability of playing safety. He's a corner in high school, but he's well built and certainly is somebody who could probably play over there. But I look at safety similar to corner where they're going to lose their two starters, I think, after this year. I really like what we've seen from Aaron Flowers. I mean, I'm high on Kingston Lopa and Peyton Woodyard's upside, but those are also 3 true freshmen, right? Yeah. And so it's really important you get some guys in this 25 class that could come in right away, and who better than the number 1 ranked player at that position. So, getting McNutt is less of a luxury almost than getting a Pickett, just because I think there's real need. Like there's guys on the roster, not that there aren't at safety, but there's a bunch of corners that I think are capable of being contributors next year. The list at safety is a little shorter, and there's not, like we just mentioned with Pickett, you can go, we're going to go from Pickett, we'll go grab Offord. I'm not aware of another safety. Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Like maybe you kick the tires again on Amarion Robinson, who I think picked Oklahoma a couple weeks ago over Oregon. But there's not like a super logical, hey, here's this other 5-star, or here's this other big time recruit you'd bring in who'd be, almost just as good, quote unquote. So I think that one would hurt a little bit more. But it sounds like maybe it's just a computer problem and not another team surging problem.
What a weird world we live in. What an absolutely weird world for all of this to be happening and playing out the way it did. But we are, and that's what's happened. And so Oregon moves forward. They now wait. But you were right. Like really, the only name that's out there is Amarion Robinson. Maybe you, like you said, maybe circle back, see if you can flip him. But the reality is they've recruited this safety position really well the last couple of years. And if McNutt's the only safety you add, that's fine, because you're probably going to have to hit the portal anyways. Because what's the value of having 7 freshmen, redshirt freshmen, or sophomores that have hardly played any football over 6? Or, like adding one more all of a sudden doesn't give you just a wealth of experience within the group. And like there's roster building that plays into a factor. You don't want your entire position group to essentially be the same year. Like that's not ideal. So the reality probably becomes as you look at McNutt, and if you don't land McNutt, then it becomes really interesting of where you pivot, who you try to flip, who you try and find. You might have to go JUCO, maybe have to move some guys within your position groups to replace, the parted numbers, and then it just puts the importance on the portal. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. We'll have Saturday Night Live visitor list coming up here on DuckTerritory.com later this weekend. We'll have some previews of it ahead of next weekend's event. Brandon Huffman from 24/7 Sports is expected to be on campus for that. Erik and I will also be there. Potentially, hopefully Erik doesn't get tied up in this IT travel stuff because
it just dawned on me. I'm flying to Indianapolis, and hopefully everything is good.
And that's what we're going to talk about next here on the podcast. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to actually look ahead to the season that's coming up. Media Day is approaching. Erik usually did something that I would say, and we got to get his opinion of why it happens coming up next. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. We teased it a little bit. I'm usually the one that's positive and a little out there in terms of positivity and, hey, things are going to go perfect. And Erik's more of the reserved one between the two of us. But, Erik, you have flipped the script here. Not to bury the lead, you projected Oregon to go 12-0.
Yep.
Why?
Sure did. I think so. It's interesting. I think between the three of us, we'll throw Jared in there. I feel like I'm in the middle. Jared's typically the most pessimistic or realistic, and Matt's probably typically the most optimistic, if we want to put it that way. But like last year, we both predicted Oregon would go 11-1. So I mean, I'm not usually like they're going to lose every game, but this year feels a little different. And I'll be honest, I usually make these predictions in like May or like much earlier in the summer months, but this time around, I really had a hard time with one game, and that was Oregon, Ohio State. Like I think the schedule is way more favorable than some people maybe want to say nationally. Oregon is favored in every one of these games, which is kind of an interesting note. I think it's a 1 point line right now. Oregon favored by 1 against Ohio State at Autzen in October. I think it's 3.5 in Ann Arbor in Oregon's favor. So, the Vegas will tell you that this isn't a crazy idea. Fans apparently will. It's strange because when I predict Oregon's going to lose a game, I get a lot of crap. And then if I predict Oregon's not going to lose any games, I still get a lot of crap. But that's totally fine. That's how this works. There's going to be people in the comments who hate that I've done it. There are going to be people in the comments who like that this is what I've said. But I sincerely think it's possible. And like, I did it in part to just raise awareness for like, I don't think it's crazy at all to suggest it. Like you look at the way the schedule breaks down, and I know football is football, and there's always going to be a weird weekend where things don't go totally right and something happens kind of unexpectedly. But I think with the roster Oregon has built and the way the schedule kind of comes together, I think they're built to avoid a lot of that. I just think this is going to be a really deep, talented team. I've said it before. I think this is the most talented roster this school has ever produced. I think, the first month, I mean, it's a weird season when they have 2 bye weeks, but the first month of it is like kind of just cakewalk in my mind. And then you see what you're made of against Ohio State. And that's the big one for me. And I've gone back and forth. I think you can argue it either way, but I really think Oregon has a great chance to win that. I think it would be a huge statement game nationally. And then the back half of the schedule, after Ohio State, it's a pretty easy run. And then November gets a little bit interesting with games at Michigan, games at Wisconsin, and then wrapping it up against Washington at home. But I think Oregon has a better roster than all those teams. And depending on how the season goes from a momentum perspective, they might have a lot more to play for. So that was some of the logic in it. I mean, you can go read the story on DuckTerritory. I wrote a couple hundred words on each game, kind of breaking down my thoughts, but that's kind of broadly where my head was at. And again, I wouldn't write it if I didn't think it was plausible. And I really do think Oregon has a chance to win all the regular season games this year.
You mentioned the first 5 games of the season, and it's almost like I would be more shocked if one of those 5 was a game within 10 points at the final buzzer than Oregon winning all of them by 21 or more. Like that feels just like the competition. Like UCLA could be sneaky good. It's a road game in LA, but they won't have, there'll be a ton of Duck fans there. Michigan State, maybe on a Friday, on a short week, first, time playing a true original OG Big Ten team. And then even after Ohio State, like at Purdue on a short week on a Friday night could be dicey, but Oregon should slice that team.
On that note, like people brought that up as a trap game. I'm really skeptical Purdue's very good this year. They won 4 games last year and they lost some pretty key players on offense. They've got a couple of good defensive players, but like I get that as being a trap game because it has all the makings from a schedule perspective on the road after an emotional game on a short week. I just don't think Purdue's good enough personally, but we'll see. I mean, maybe we'll get into the season, they'll look a lot better and they'll look a little more scary. But right now, that's where I'm at.
Have we ever seen? I mean, look, it's a very small sample size. It's 15 games in year 2 and 13 games in year 1, so 28 total games. But have we seen a Dan Lanning team show up and lay a dud from against
game one of his tenure? Other than that, no, none of it.
Right. But that wasn't because they overlooked their opponent. They were simply just outmatched.
Totally.
They have been prepared for every game. We've not seen them show up and overestimate their opponent. But Illinois, that's another one, blowout. Even the Michigan game, like that one should be close. You give the national champions for a reason. They still have a ton of talent, but new head coach, new offense, new quarterback. Their offensive line gets reshuffled. Their defensive line has some departures as well. But that should be a game, even on the road. Like Oregon should be better. Oregon should be capable of winning that one. And it's like 50-50 at for either Ohio State and Michigan. And after that, it's Washington. But Washington's a shell of itself from what DeBoer had them to be. Wisconsin maybe on the road if it's like a snowy winter night, but
that one kind of, I think that's the third hardest game over Washington, just because who knows what the weather's going to be, and Wisconsin's tough. But I think there's, as you said, 2 50-50-ish games that I think Oregon has a great chance to win. And then the rest of it, doesn't it feel pretty doable?
Yes. I don't know. And then it just turns into, okay, well, can you win one more time in Big Ten play in the conference championship and you get 13-0? You go 13-0 or even 12-1 and you win the Big Ten, you're probably a top 4 team, guaranteed. If you 13-0, you're number 1 in the playoffs, and everything is set up for you to get your way to the national championship game. But before that, like that's a long ways down the road.
Well, can I ask you one question, Matt? What was your reaction when you saw I did that? Does that, like, I know you haven't done your predictions yet. Does this make you want to go to a 12-0 prediction and follow up, or where's your head at with this? I'm curious.
I was surprised because I'm the more positive thinker between the two of us. And my first reaction was like, well, if I want to like counterbalance it, which I don't take too much into account, like I think they're going to beat Ohio State at home. If that was at Ohio State, I would pick Ohio State. But
agreed.
Like it's a home game. And then it becomes, okay, well, Michigan's a road game and Wisconsin's a road game. But I think Oregon's better than both those teams. And I'm not just going to pick a loss simply just to, they're going to lose one. I don't care who it is. It's just going to be just somebody. Like maybe they do get sniped by Purdue. Maybe they do trip up at Wisconsin. But I'm probably more leaning towards your direction of 12-0. Like if they stay relatively healthy, like I'm in agreement. Like that's probably the big thing for me is the Ohio State game's a 50-50 toss-up. Maybe 51-49 in Ohio State, but you factor in the home factor and Oregon probably gets a little bit of an edge there. But as long as they don't have these catastrophic injuries or a ton of them, I kind of believe that Oregon's like a top 3 team in college football. And if you're a top 3 team in college football, you're probably going to, be 12-0 or close to it. And I guess I'm more in agreement, and it's hard for me to convince myself to say 11-1 because I think they beat Ohio State. And then after that, it's like, where's a game that you definitively feel like they're going to lose? There isn't one.
That was my thinking too, is if you just do it on a game-by-game basis, you just talk it out, write it out, think it out, however you want to do it. Ohio State's really the one game where I was like, maybe I'm being a homer, because the rest of it really does feel like it favors Oregon. I think Michigan is as we've said, also potentially scary, because I think that defense is going to be really good. But Oregon's going to have the best quarterback probably every game this season. That was not always the case last year. As good as Bo Nix was, like Michael Penix Jr. played a big role. Sometimes. He was better in those matchups. I hate to say it. I don't see a quarterback on the schedule this year that's going to be the case. There might be a roster like Ohio State's, which is probably top to bottom better. Oregon's roster, I'll begin on, because I know we had obviously we had Bud on to talk about the blue chip ratio a little bit ago. Like that was Oregon's was 5th, Ohio State's was 1st. I'll be curious when 24/7 Sports does its team college composite rankings, how that comes together. But I guarantee you Ohio State's the only team that's going to be comparable or better in terms of just that. So if we're talking purely a roster perspective, I know these games aren't played this way. We've had to eat our crow. I remember that Iowa State Fiesta Bowl where we were like, oh, Oregon's going to roll, and that didn't happen. So maybe this will look really silly, but I just think this is a really talented Oregon team. I think they're going to have a really special season.
Yeah, finding a loss beyond Ohio State that feels like definitive is hard. And it's just set up well for them to be in a position to go potentially 12-0. And that's the hardest thing to do in college football is 12-0. Or I think in all college athletics is probably 12-0. And it's only happened once at Oregon, but it's happened. It hasn't happened in the modern era, the current era of college football. But we'll see. We'll see.
And if they do it, let's not print T-shirts with 12-0.
Yes, that's
not in the regular season. Let's wait till the end.
Guaranteeing you're going to lose your next game.
As somebody who had a 12-0 T-shirt after Oregon ran the table in the regular season back in 2009, that shirt was not as valuable about a month later when,
as you could imagine.
Yeah, you know what happened.
All right, Big Ten Media Day. We teased it a little bit. You're going there to Indianapolis to speak with Dan Lanning, Jeffrey Bossa, Terrence Ferguson, and is it Dylan Gabriel?
Dylan Gabriel will be there.
Dylan Gabriel is going to be there. I guess just you've been rolling out your get to know your feature stories on Oregon's Big Ten opponents, but there's got to be some excitement here, right? Like new conference. It's going to be a new venue for us. I'm not going this year. It's a new venue for us though to go and cover. It's new people to get to know from a reporting standpoint that cover other Big Ten teams. Like, I guess just what's your headspace going into this for next week?
I think it's going to be really fun. I mean, one of the cool things about being in this industry for a while is like we would go to Pac-12 Media Day, and that was always in Vegas, by the way. Much more simple travel plans, a little easier to get to from Eugene, but I would know like, hey, here's the guy who runs the Colorado site who's going to be on our podcast this fall, and I would talk with them. And here's Steve Bartle from Utah. We're buddies. Let's talk about the Utes and the Ducks, and let's meet up with Jamie from the Washington State side or whoever it would be, and like we would be able to have lunch together and hang out and spend time throughout the day, and then hey, I'll see you later on in the year when Oregon plays your team either at your stadium or at Autzen. And one of the things that's been tough, I think, with the Pac-12 falling apart for a lot of reasons, but one of them has just been personally, it's like I won't get to see a bunch of these beat writers again because Oregon's just not going to play them. And the other end of that is the exciting part is, hey, I'm going to go meet a bunch of new people out in Indianapolis that cover other schools that Oregon's going to be playing every year now. And we did a little bit of kind of networking with the Ohio State guys when Oregon played there in 2021, so we kind of have a feel there. But there's not really another school that I have any reason to have got to know the 24/7 guys. So I think that's going to be kind of one of the fun elements is heading out there, meeting a bunch of people, getting a feel for just kind of the conference as a whole and like what the conversations are like, right? Because like when we kind of know what the conference dynamics are here, and I think broadly I have a sense of like everybody knows Ohio State and Michigan are traditionally like ahead of everybody, but from an Oregon perspective entering, I'll be curious to hear what the conversations are. Like, is everybody just like, oh, Oregon's buying a team with Phil Knight's money, they're going to get busted on the field, or is there going to be a level of kind of appreciation? I'm sure I'll get ribbed a little bit for predicting they're going 12-0. I guarantee somebody will bring that up, or I'll bring it up and they'll make fun of me for it. But no, I just think in general it'd be fun to meet some new people, and then of course to kind of just see how Oregon is accepted into this conference. Because when everything came together about a year ago, right around this time, it was kind of like, wow, this is exciting for Oregon, but to now be here and be in this situation where it's starting is really kind of cool.
I'll be curious to see how well represented Oregon's players will be in the all-conference team.
Good question. Yeah.
Like what? Because this will be purely based off of respect of the Oregon program, going in. And it's kind of like a unique deal where next year when these teams get released, everyone will have had a year's sampling of how Oregon has transitioned into the Big Ten and how they've been able to stack up with everybody else that they're playing now. Where this year's group, there's no data that you can go out and pull that shows how well they performed through a Big Ten season. And all their information is going to be based off of Pac-12 year, or if they came from a different conference, and maybe there was a little bit of overlap, but not enough. So this is like how high of a level of respect does the media have, and does the Big Ten coaches have for this new coming program in the conference? And are they going to be blanketed with players across the board in these teams, or will we be seeing a team that's like lightly sprinkled with some Oregon players just because the unfamiliarity of Oregon in the Big Ten and how it translates?
That's a good point. Yeah, the dynamics are going to be interesting. I would guess there's going to be some players that are no-brainers to be on these teams just because they're like up for national awards and potential All-Americans. But yeah, do Oregon players get the benefit of the doubt when it's like, hey, this guy was, an all Pac-12 guy last year, but there's a bunch of really good Big Ten guys returning. Like, that'll be kind of the interesting part of this, because it's media vote, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Like, so
Big Ten does it different. They do have media. They have a media team, and then they've always had also a coaches team as well. They have both.
So it'll be interesting. I guess it'll be interesting to see how those differ potentially in terms of perception. So, but yeah, no, that's going to be interesting. I'll be interested to see where Oregon comes in on the Big Ten preseason poll. I would imagine they're top 2. If they're lower than 2, that would probably be a bit of a surprise. Maybe there'll be some. Michigan won a national championship last year. They deserve to be ahead of Oregon, but I think what we've seen on the national the landscape, it seems like most people think Ohio State and Oregon are a little bit ahead of Michigan right now. So I'll be curious to see how that comes together. I don't anticipate Oregon is ahead of Ohio State just because of moving conferences and kind of a lack of maybe institutional knowledge there, and then also because Ohio State's really freaking good too.
Yes. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back next week talking full-on Big Ten Media Day. We'll have coverage throughout the week of it. Erik will be there. I'll be helping cover remotely. And then the weekend next week ends with Saturday Night Live on the 27th. And then before you know it, it rolls right into the 29th with Oregon's own Media Day.
And the start of fall camp.
So we are like a week away from football truly starting in Eugene. Exciting times. Hopefully you're with us at DuckTerritory.com for it. And until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.